Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, often referred to as the Milwaukee Cannibal or cannibalism, is one of America's most notorious serial killers and sex offender. But do you know what drove Dahmer to commit such heinous acts? What led to his infamy, and how did he evade capture for so long? Can you imagine the psychological and societal impact his crimes had on his community and beyond? In today's video, we are going to discuss the tragic story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Stay with us and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, often referred to as the Milwaukee Cannibal or cannibalism, was an American serial killer and sex offender who killed and dismembered 17 males between 1978 and 1991. Many of his later murders involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts, typically all or part of the skeleton. Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and died on November 28, 1994 in Portage, Wisconsin, at the age of 34 from severe skull and brain trauma after being bludgeoned by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, at the Columbia Correctional Institution. He was convicted of first-degree murder, 16 counts, disorderly conduct, 2 counts, second-degree sexual assault, and enticing a child for immoral purposes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, totaling 941 years. Dahmer's crimes spanned from 1978 to 1991, and he was apprehended on July 22, 1991. He was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic disorder, but was found to be legally sane at his trial. Convicted of 15 of the 16 homicides committed in Wisconsin, Dahmer was sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment on February 17, 1992. He later received a 16th term of life imprisonment for an additional homicide committed in Ohio in 1978. Jeffrey Dahmer was seen as outcast in high school, drinking heavily and hiding his liquor in his jacket. He was polite and intelligent, but earned only average grades. He played tennis and briefly joined the school band. Dahmer discovered he was gay in puberty and had a brief relationship with another boy. He began fantasizing about dominating a submissive male partner, which evolved into fantasies about dissection. Dahmer conceived a plan to render a male jogger unconscious and sexual use his body when he was 16. He waited with a baseball bat, but the jogger didn't pass by. This was his first attempt to attack someone. Dahmer was known for his pranks called doing a Dahmer and performed them for money to buy alcohol. As his parents' marriage deteriorated, they divorced in 1978. Dahmer's father moved out, and his mother took his younger brother to live with relatives. Dahmer, 18, stayed in the family home. His parents' divorce was finalized in July 1978, with his mother receiving custody and alimony. Dahmer's behavior and fantasies hinted at the dark path he would eventually take. His struggles with alcohol, relationships, and family dynamics contributed to his isolation and descent into darkness. Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder on June 18, 1978, 3 weeks after his high school graduation. Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker, Stephen Mark Hicks, who was nearly 19 years old. Dahmer lured Hicks to his house with the promise of drinking beer together, as Hicks was hitchhiking to a rock concert at Chippewa Lake Park, Ohio. Dahmer later admitted that the sight of Hicks stirred his sexual feelings, although he knew any advances would be rebuffed when Hicks began talking about girls. After hours of talking, drinking, and listening to music, Hicks wanted to leave, but Dahmer didn't want him to go. Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks with a 10-pound dumbbell, striking him twice from behind, and then strangling him with the bar of the dumbbell. He stripped Hicks's body and explored it before masturbating over the corpse. The next day, Dahmer dissected the body in his basement, buried the remains in a shallow grave, and later unearthed and disposed of them. He dissolved the flesh in acid, flushed the solution down the toilet, and scattered the crushed bones in the woodland behind his house. Hicks' necklace and the knife used were discarded into the Cuyahoga River. 6 weeks after the murder of Hicks, Dahmer's father discovered him living alone. In August 1978, Dahmer enrolled at Ohio State University, OSU, but dropped out after 3 months due to alcohol abuse and poor grades. His only successful course was riflery. In January 1979, Dahmer enlisted in the United States Army, undergoing basic training at Fort McClellan and training as a medical specialist at Fort Sam Houston. He was occasionally reprimanded for intoxication and insubordination. In July 1979, Dahmer was deployed to Baumholder, West Germany, where he initially performed adequately but deteriorated due to alcohol abuse. By March 1981, he was deemed unsuitable for military service and was honorably discharged. Dahmer chose to travel to Miami Beach, Florida, instead of returning home. He worked at a delicatessen and lived in a motel, spending most of his salary on alcohol. After being evicted for non-payment, he lived on the beach until he asked his father to return to Ohio in September 1981. After returning to Ohio, Jeffrey Dahmer lived with his father and stepmother, but his heavy drinking continued. He was arrested for drunk and disorderly conduct and fined $60. His father tried to help him overcome his addiction, but eventually sent him to live with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin, in December 1981. Initially, Dahmer's life with his grandmother was peaceful. He attended church, did chores, and looked for work. However, he continued to drink and smoke. In 1982, he found a job as a phlebotomist, but was laid off after 10 months. He remained unemployed for over 2 years, relying on his grandmother's support. During this time, Dahmer was arrested for indecent exposure at the Wisconsin State Fair Park in 1982. He was fined $50 and convicted. In 1985, he started working at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, but his fascination with control and dominance grew. He began frequenting gay bars, bathhouses, and bookstores, and stole a male mannequin for sexual stimulation. Dahmer's sexual encounters became increasingly disturbing. He administered sleeping pills to his partners and performed sexual acts while they were unconscious. He was banned from the bathhouses and began using hotel rooms. In 1986, he attempted to dig up a freshly buried corpse, but abandoned the plan. In September 1986, Dahmer was arrested for lewd and lascivious behavior after masturbating in front of two 12-year-old boys. He admitted the offense and was sentenced to 1 year of probation and counseling in March 1987. Dahmer's dark fantasies and impulses continued to escalate, leading him down a path of destruction. In November 1987, Jeffrey Dahmer met Stephen Tuomi at a bar and took him to the Ambassador Hotel, where he had rented a room. Dahmer intended to drug Tuomi and explore his body, but he awoke to find Tuomi dead, with severe bruises and blood coming from his mouth. Dahmer had no memory of killing Tuomi and was shocked by what had happened. Over the next year, Dahmer killed several more men and boys, including James Dockstader, Richard Guerrero, and Anthony Sears. He lured them to his grandmother's home or his apartment, drugged them, and strangled them. Dahmer then dismembered their bodies, disposing of most of the remains in the trash and keeping some body parts, such as skulls and genitalia, for himself. In 1989, Dahmer was arrested for drugging and fondling a 13-year-old boy and was sentenced to 5 years probation and 1 year in the House of Correction. He was paroled after 2 months and began his probation, which included registering as a sex offender. Dahmer's killings continued until his arrest in 1991, when he was caught by police after one of his intended victims escaped and led them to his apartment. Inside, they found a house of horrors, with human remains and evidence of Dahmer's crimes. Dahmer's psychological evaluations revealed deep feelings of alienation, impulsivity, and a schizoid personality disorder. He was found to be suspicious of others and dismayed by his lack of accomplishments in life. Dahmer's crimes were marked by his desire for control and his inability to form healthy relationships. He used his charm and good looks to lure his victims to their deaths, and his intelligence and resourcefulness to evade detection. On May 14, 1990, Jeffrey Dahmer moved into apartment 213 at 924 North 25th Street, bringing with him the mummified head and genitals of his previous victim, Anthony Sears. Despite being in a high-crime area, the apartment's proximity to Dahmer's workplace and its low rent of $300 a month, excluding electricity, made it an economical choice. Within a week of moving in, Dahmer murdered his sixth victim, Raymond Smith, a 32-year-old prostitute. Dahmer lured Smith to his apartment with a promise of $50 for sex, then drugged him with a drink laced with 7 sleeping pills before strangling him. Dahmer took Polaroid photographs of Smith's body in various positions before dismembering it in the bathroom. He boiled the legs, arms, and pelvis in a steel kettle with Soilax, a cleaning agent, and dissolved the remaining parts of Smith's skeleton, except the skull, in acid. He spray-painted the skull and stored it alongside Sears' skull in a filing cabinet. Shortly after Smith's murder, Dahmer accidentally consumed a drink laced with sedatives intended for a new victim. When he awoke, he found that the man had stolen several items, including clothing and $300. Dahmer did not report this robbery, but mentioned it to his probation officer on May 29th. In June 1990, Dahmer murdered 27-year-old Edward Smith, an acquaintance. Dahmer drugged and strangled Smith, then initially placed the skeleton in his freezer to prevent moisture retention. However, the freezing did not work as intended, and Dahmer later acidified the skeleton. The skull was accidentally destroyed when Dahmer placed it in the oven to dry, causing it to explode. Dahmer later expressed regret for not being able to retain any parts of Smith's body. On July 3rd, Dahmer encountered 22-year-old Ernest Miller. Dahmer lured Miller to his apartment under the pretense of posing for photographs. After drugging Miller, Dahmer killed him by slashing his carotid artery and then took suggestive Polaroid photos of Miller's body. Dahmer dismembered the body, freezing some parts for later consumption and boiling others into a jelly-like substance. He preserved the skeleton in bleach and painted the severed head. 3 weeks later, on September 24th, Dahmer met 22-year-old David Thomas at the Grand Avenue Mall. Dahmer lured Thomas to his apartment with an offer of drinks and money for photographs. After drugging Thomas, Dahmer found himself uninterested, and fearing Thomas might awaken and be angry, he strangled him and dismembered the body. Dahmer did not retain any parts of Thomas and photographed the dismemberment process. Following Thomas's murder, Dahmer did not kill anyone for nearly 5 months, although he attempted to lure men to his apartment on at least 5 occasions without success. During this period, he experienced anxiety, depression, and financial difficulties and expressed suicidal thoughts to his probation officer. In February 1991, Dahmer killed 17-year-old Curtis Straughter, whom he lured to his apartment with money for posing nude. Dahmer drugged Straughter, cuffed him, and strangled him with a leather strap. He then dismembered Straughter and retained the skull, hands, and genitals, photographing each stage of the dismemberment. On April 7th, Dahmer encountered 19-year-old Errol Lindsay, whom he lured to his apartment under the pretense of getting a key cut. Dahmer drugged Lindsay and drilled a hole in his skull to inject hydrochloric acid, intending to create a permanent, submissive state. Lindsay briefly regained consciousness, but was then drugged again and strangled. Dahmer flayed the body and attempted to preserve the skin in salt water, but eventually discarded it due to deterioration. Residents of the Oxford apartments complained frequently about foul odors and strange noises coming from Dahmer's apartment. Dahmer attributed the smells to a malfunctioning freezer or recently deceased tropical fish, but the complaints persisted. On May 24th, Dahmer met 31-year-old aspiring model Tony Hughes at a nightclub. He lured Hughes to his apartment with an offer of money for photographs, drugged him, and attempted to inject hydrochloric acid into his skull. The injection proved fatal, and Dahmer dismembered Hughes' body, retaining the skull. On May 26th, Dahmer encountered 14-year-old Conorak Synthesomphone on Wisconsin Avenue. Synthesomphone was the younger brother of a boy Dahmer had molested in 1988. Dahmer offered Synthesomphone money for photos and drugged him. Dahmer then drilled a hole in Synthesomphone's skull and injected hydrochloric acid. Synthesomphone briefly awoke, but Dahmer left him alone, returning later to find him on the street. Dahmer convinced the police that Synthesomphone was his intoxicated boyfriend, and the officers did not intervene despite the witnesses' concerns. Dahmer killed Synthesomphone with a second acid injection and dismembered him along with Hughes. On June 30th, Dahmer traveled to Chicago and met 20-year-old Matt Turner at a bus station. Turner accepted Dahmer's offer to return to Milwaukee for a photo shoot. Dahmer drugged, strangled, and dismembered Turner, storing his head and internal organs in the freezer. On July 5th, Dahmer lured 23-year-old Jeremiah Weinberger from a Chicago bar with the promise of spending the weekend together. Dahmer drugged Weinberger and injected boiling water into his skull twice, causing Weinberger to fall into a coma from which he later died. On July 15th, Dahmer met 24-year-old Oliver Lacey and invited him to his apartment under the pretense of posing for photographs. After engaging in sexual activity, Dahmer drugged Lacey and, after unsuccessfully using chloroform to render him unconscious, strangled him. Dahmer had sex with Lacey's corpse before dismembering him, placing his head and heart in the refrigerator and his skeleton in the freezer. On July 19th, Dahmer was informed of his dismissal from work. Upset, he lured 25-year-old Joseph Bradehoff to his apartment, where he was strangled and left covered with a sheet. Dahmer discovered the head infested with maggots and subsequently dismembered and acidified Bradehoff's body, along with those of his recent victims. On July 22, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer invited 32-year-old Tracy Edwards to his apartment with an offer of $100 for posing nude and spending time with him. Once inside, Edwards noticed a foul odor and several boxes of hydrochloric acid, which Dahmer claimed were for cleaning bricks. Dahmer then handcuffed Edwards, brandished a knife, and made disturbing comments about eating his heart. Edwards, seeking an opportunity to escape, convinced Dahmer to move to the living room where he could use the bathroom. Seizing the moment, Edwards punched Dahmer and fled. At 11:30 p.m., Edwards flagged down Milwaukee police officers Robert Routh and Rolf Miller, showing them one of the handcuffs. The officers followed Edwards back to Dahmer's apartment, where Dahmer admitted to handcuffing Edwards but offered no further explanation. Inside, Muller discovered numerous Polaroid photographs of dismembered bodies and a severed head in the refrigerator. Dahmer attempted to resist arrest but was quickly subdued. The police found 4 severed heads, 7 skulls, body parts, and dismembered torsos in various stages of preservation throughout the apartment. During his interrogation, Dahmer confessed to 17 murders, including one from 1978 in Ohio. He detailed his methods, including necrophilia, and described his intention to create a private altar with victims' skulls. Dahmer was charged with multiple counts of murder in Wisconsin and, later, with the murder of his first victim, Stephen Hicks, in Ohio. On January 13, 1992, Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane to 15 counts of murder. Jeffrey Dahmer's trial began on January 30, 1992 in Milwaukee. Having pled guilty to 15 counts of first-degree murder on January 13th, Dahmer's defense argued he was insane due to mental disorders, including necrophilia and various personality disorders. The prosecution countered that Dahmer was aware of his actions and acted with premeditation. During the trial, experts debated Dahmer's sanity. The defense's Fred Berlin and Judith Becker argued Dahmer's necrophilic urges impaired his ability to control his actions. The prosecution's Fred Fosdahl and Park Dietz claimed Dahmer was sane, calculating, and used alcohol to mask his inhibitions, not compulsion. On February 15, 1992, Dahmer was declared sane and sentenced to life imprisonment plus 70 years. Dahmer expressed no desire for freedom, acknowledging his crimes and accepting his punishment. He was later extradited to Ohio for the murder of his first victim, Stephen Hicks, receiving an additional life sentence. Imprisoned at Columbia Correctional Institution, Dahmer spent a year in solitary confinement before working in the prison. He converted to Christianity, was baptized, and received regular visits from a minister. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was killed by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver. Scarver claimed God instructed him to carry out the attack. Dahmer's body was cremated in September 1995, and his ashes divided between his parents. The Oxford apartments, where Dahmer committed many murders, were demolished in 1992. The auction of Dahmer's estate sparked controversy, leading to the destruction of his possessions. Lionel Dahmer, Dahmer's father, published a book, and both he and his second wife, Sherry, remained publicly supportive of him until her death in January 2023. Lionel died in December 2023. That's all for this video. We hope you have enjoyed this video a lot. What are your thoughts about his crime? Let us know in the comment section. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell icon for more interesting videos like this. Thank you for watching our video.